They picked someone else, called you the backup, but the moment you walked away, they realized you were the main character. In this Savage Endings compilation, second choice becomes first place. This is I was the backup plan until I took the lead.
He thought I'd cry when he chose her. Instead, I let him watch me rise without him. Brielle stood at the edge of the rooftop terrace, the city lights stretching out before her. Each glittering window and flashing billboard a reminder of the world she had reclaimed. Behind her, the party buzzed with low laughter and clinking glasses, the air thick with perfume and whispered conversations. The kind of event where reputations are made and futures are rewritten. She took a slow breath, letting the cool night air fill her lungs. Her fingers curled loosely around the stem of her wine glass. Her pulse steady, her heart calm. She had come a long way from the woman who had once defined herself by the man standing at the bar across the room, the one leaning a little too close to his new girlfriend, his head tipped back in laughter, his polished shoes glinting in the low, golden light. Marcus, the man she had once loved, the man who had chosen someone else, the man who had convinced himself that she would crumble, that she would fade into the background of his life without a backward glance. And beside him, laughing too loudly, fingertips grazing his arm, was Amelia, the woman he had left her for, the woman who had once pretended to be her friend, the woman who had smiled in her face while slipping a knife between her ribs. Brielle took another sip of her wine, her eyes narrowing as she watched them move through the crowd, their smiles wide, their laughter bright, their bodies angled toward each other like two halves of a whole. She felt the familiar ache of betrayal, the sharp, stinging ache of a wound that had once felt like it would never heal. But it passed quickly, replaced by a deep, unshakable sense of satisfaction, a quiet, steady certainty that she had already won. Marcus had thought she would cry when he chose Amelia, had thought she would crumble, fall apart, fade into the background of the life he had so carelessly discarded. But instead, she had risen, had rebuilt, had reclaimed her power, had walked away from the ashes of their relationship without a backward glance. And as she turned back to the skyline, her glass cool against her lips, her heart steady in her chest, she felt the first real smile she had known in months spread across her lips. She had survived. She had thrived. And Marcus? He had become nothing more than a chapter she had already closed. Brielle met Marcus during the summer of her promotion, when the world had felt wide open, full of possibilities, every moment humming with the electric promise of something new. They had met at a charity gala, the kind of carefully curated event where everyone dressed a little too well, laughed a little too loudly, pretended a little too hard to be happy. She had been standing at the bar, nursing a glass of Chardonnay, her feet aching in her new heels, her mind already drifting to the pile of work waiting for her on Monday morning. Then she felt a warm hand on her arm, the gentle pressure of a stranger's touch, the soft, subtle weight of an introduction she hadn't seen coming. "Is this seat taken?" His voice was smooth, deep, tinged with the kind of self-assured confidence that made her pulse quicken, made her spine straighten, made her lips curve into a small, cautious smile. She glanced up, her eyes locking with his for the first time, taking in the sharp cut of his jaw, the cool, steady weight of his gaze, the way his lips quirked into a crooked, boyish grin as he slipped onto the barstool beside her. "Not anymore," she replied, her voice light, her heart already racing, her mind already turning over the possibilities, the small, whispered promises of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. They talked for hours that night, their voices low, their bodies angled toward each other, the noise of the party fading into the background as they traded stories, shared quiet, breathless laughs, brushed hands beneath the bar like teenagers on a first date. By the time he walked her to her car, his hand warm against the small of her back, his breath soft against her ear as he whispered goodnight, she had already felt the first flicker of something real, something undeniable, something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter in her life. But the first doubt crept in not long after. A small, almost imperceptible shift in the way he spoke to her, the way he looked at her, the way his eyes flicked to his phone during their dates, his fingers tapping out quick, urgent messages, his laugh a little too forced, his smile a little too tight. "Who's that?" she asked one night, her voice light, her tone casual, her heart already tightening in her chest. He glanced up, his eyes too bright, his grin too wide. "Oh, just work stuff," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket, leaning over to press a quick kiss to her forehead. "Nothing for you to worry about." She forced a smile, tried to convince herself that she was overreacting, that she was being paranoid, that she was letting her own insecurities twist his words into something they weren't. But the seed had already been planted. The first small crack already forming in the foundation of their relationship. The first whisper of doubt already slipping into the corners of her mind. And by the time she realized how deep that doubt had grown, it was already too late. The warnings started as whispers. Small, subtle hints dropped into conversations over coffee. Quiet, cautious glances exchanged over cocktails. The kind of well-meaning concerns that friends voice when they don't know how to say what they're really thinking. The first came from Tessa, Brielle's oldest friend, the one who had been with her through college heartbreaks, late-night study sessions, and cross-country moves. They had been sitting on the patio of their favorite wine bar, the air warm and thick with the smell of lavender and fresh basil, the sun dipping below the skyline in a wash of pink and gold. "So," Tessa said, her fingers wrapped tightly around the stem of her glass, her eyes flicking away as she took a slow, measured sip. "How are things with Marcus?" Brielle smiled, the kind of wide, unguarded smile that only comes from the early days of a new relationship, when every moment feels bright and promising, when every touch feels electric, when every whispered promise feels unbreakable. "They're good," she said, her voice light, her heart swelling at the thought of him, the way he had kissed her goodbye that morning, his lips warm against her neck, his arms tight around her waist. "Really good." Tessa hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly as she swirled the wine in her glass, her teeth catching on her bottom lip, the small, nervous gesture Brielle had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort, a subtle, silent plea for Brielle to listen, to pay attention, to hear the words Tessa was too afraid to say. "Just be careful," Tessa said finally, her voice low, her eyes locking with Brielle's, the words slipping out in a quiet, hurried rush, as if she were afraid of what they might mean. "I've heard some things about him, from people at work. Nothing specific, just, I don't know. Be careful." Brielle felt a small, sharp pang of anxiety tighten in her chest, a flicker of doubt that felt like the first tremor of an earthquake, a small, whispered warning that something was not quite right. But she forced a smile, reached across the table to squeeze Tessa's hand, her fingers warm against her friend's cool skin, her mind already dismissing the concern, the small, nagging voice in the back of her head whispering that she was overreacting, that Tessa was just being protective, that Marcus was different, that their love was different, that she had finally found something real. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice steady, her smile bright, her heart already pushing the doubt to the back of her mind. "I promise." And for a while, she believed it. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day that clings to your skin, heavy and oppressive, turning every small inconvenience into a quiet catastrophe. Brielle had taken the afternoon off work, hoping to surprise Marcus with his favorite takeout from the little Thai place they loved, the one tucked into the corner of a quiet side street, where the walls were lined with paper lanterns and the air always smelled like lemongrass and basil. She parked in front of his office building, her windshield wipers slapping rhythmically against the glass, her hands wrapped tightly around the paper bag of food, still warm, still steaming, the spicy scent filling her car and making her stomach growl despite the nervous flutter in her chest. As she stepped out of the car, the rain soaked through her jacket, cold and sharp against her skin, but she ignored it, telling herself that the surprise would be worth it, that his smile would make the shivering walk worthwhile. She pushed through the revolving doors, her shoes squeaking against the polished marble floor, her heart already lifting at the thought of seeing him, of catching him off guard, of reminding him that they were still them, that they were still a team. But then she saw them, through the glass walls of the conference room, huddled together in a corner, their heads bent close, their hands touching in a way that felt too familiar, too intimate, too wrong. It was Marcus and Amelia, the same Amelia who had once been a friendly face at their parties, the same Amelia who had laughed too loudly at Marcus's jokes, who had hugged Brielle a little too tightly at their last dinner party, who had slipped her number into Marcus's phone, just in case, after a late night at the bar. They were laughing, smiling, her hand resting on his arm, his head tilted toward hers, their bodies angled together like two halves of a whole. Brielle felt her breath catch in her throat, her pulse thundering in her ears, the warmth of the takeout bag seeping into her numb fingers, the smell of chili and garlic suddenly nauseating. He hadn't seen her. Neither of them had. They were too wrapped up in each other, too lost in the quiet, stolen moment to notice the woman standing on the other side of the glass, watching her life crack open at the seams. And in that moment, Brielle realized something she hadn't wanted to face. He had never truly chosen her. Not really. Not in the way she had chosen him. Not in the way she had once believed so fiercely that she would have defended it against the world. And that, more than anything else, was the moment her heart finally broke. Brielle didn't break. Not the way she thought she might. Not the way Marcus probably expected her to. There were tears, of course. Silent, burning trails down her cheeks in the dark hours of the night, when the reality of what she had seen felt too heavy to carry alone. Moments when she clutched her pillow, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps, her chest aching with the kind of raw, unfiltered pain that made her question everything she had ever believed about love, about loyalty, about trust. But slowly, the fog began to lift. The sharp, stinging ache of betrayal began to dull, replaced by something stronger, something sharper, something unbreakable. It started with the small things. She deleted his photos from her phone, erased his messages, unfollowed him on social media, scrubbed away every digital trace of him from her life like dirt beneath her fingernails. She cleared his things from her apartment, bagged up the clothes he had left behind, the spare toothbrush in her bathroom, the half-empty bottle of his favorite cologne on her dresser, the old college sweatshirt he had thrown over her shoulders on their first date when the wind had picked up and she had shivered against his side. She even tossed the framed photos that lined her hallway, the carefully posed snapshots of a life she had once believed was real, packed them into a box, slid it into the back of her closet, shut the door, and never looked at them again. She took back her weekends, stopped planning her life around his schedule, started saying yes to friends she had let drift away, started choosing her own happiness over the fragile, crumbling remains of a relationship that had never really been hers. She even took on a new project at work, something she would have once asked his opinion on, something he would have undoubtedly tried to steer her away from, reminding her that she needed to pace herself, to stay in her lane. She stopped listening to the echoes of his voice in her head, stopped worrying about what he might think, how he might react if he found out she was quietly building a life that no longer revolved around him. And as the days stretched into weeks, as the empty, aching spaces in her heart slowly filled with the quiet, steady strength of self-reclamation, she felt the first flicker of hope bloom in her chest. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rebuilding, reclaiming, choosing herself over his betrayal, choosing her future over the ashes of their past, choosing her worth over his lies. And she knew, with a certainty that felt like a pulse beneath her skin, that when the time came to walk away, she would do it without hesitation, without fear, without looking back. Brielle found her power quietly, not in a burst of rage, not in a dramatic, tear-streaked confrontation, not in a sudden, defiant declaration of independence, but in the slow, steady rebuilding of a life she had once let revolve around Marcus, in the small, silent acts of self-preservation that felt like whispered secrets in the quiet corners of her mind. It started with her mornings. She had always been a night owl, the kind of woman who dragged herself out of bed at the last possible moment, her hair still damp from the shower, her mind still foggy with sleep as she rushed out the door. But now, she woke early, her bare feet cool against the hardwood floors of her apartment, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee as she watched the city come to life outside her window. She started running again, long, punishing laps around the park in the early morning light, her breath sharp in her chest, her pulse thundering in her ears, each footfall a reminder that her body was still her own, still strong, still capable of carrying her through the hardest days. She even signed up for a kickboxing class, her knuckles raw against the heavy bag, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps as she pounded out the anger, the frustration, the quiet, simmering rage that had once felt too heavy to bear. She stopped waiting for his approval, stopped looking for his validation, stopped letting his voice echo in her mind, second-guessing her every word, her every choice, her every thought. She took on new projects at work, pushed for promotions, spoke up in meetings, raised her hand when others hesitated, claimed her place at the table without a second thought. She reconnected with old friends, people she had let drift away in the haze of a relationship that had demanded all of her attention and none of her honesty. Women who had known her before she had twisted herself into the version of herself Marcus had once demanded. Women who had waited patiently for her to remember who she was, who she had always been, who she would always be, with or without him. And slowly, the empty, aching spaces in her heart began to fill. The sharp, stinging ache of his betrayal began to fade, replaced by a quiet, steady certainty that she was enough, that she had always been enough, that she would always be enough, no matter who he chose. And as the days stretched into weeks, as the weeks stretched into months, she felt the first real flicker of power bloom in her chest, the slow, steady pulse of strength that felt like a heartbeat beneath her skin. She had lost him, but in doing so, she had found herself again. Brielle saw them together for the first time at a mutual friend's engagement party. The kind of carefully curated event where everyone dressed a little too well, laughed a little too loudly, pretended a little too hard to be happy. She hadn't planned to go, had almost texted her regrets at the last minute. The thought of walking into a room filled with shared memories, with whispered rumors and sympathetic glances, feeling too heavy to bear. But she had forced herself to go anyway, slipped into a dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, painted her lips a bold, defiant shade of red, slipped into her highest heels, and walked out the door with her head held high, her heart steady, her mind clear. The room buzzed with low laughter and clinking glasses, the air thick with perfume and whispered conversations. The kind of event where reputations were made and futures were rewritten. And then she saw them, Marcus and Amelia, standing near the bar, their heads bent close, their hands touching, their smiles wide and polished, their bodies angled toward each other like two halves of a whole. She felt the familiar ache of betrayal, the sharp, stinging ache of a wound that had once felt like it would never heal. But it passed quickly, replaced by a deep, unshakable sense of satisfaction, a quiet, steady certainty that she had already won. She watched as Marcus laughed a little too loudly, his hand slipping from Amelia's waist as a tall, dark-haired woman passed by, his eyes lingering a little too long, his lips curling into a small, appreciative smirk that he quickly tried to hide behind his glass. She saw the way Amelia's smile tightened, the way her eyes narrowed, the way her fingers curled into the fabric of her dress, her jaw clenching as she tried to force her smile back into place, her body stiffening as Marcus leaned in to whisper something in her ear, his hand sliding back to her waist with a possessiveness that felt more like a claim than a comfort. Brielle felt the smallest flicker of satisfaction bloom in her chest, the slow, steady pulse of justice that felt like a quiet exhale after months of holding her breath. He had chosen her, had walked away from Brielle, had discarded her like a broken toy, had convinced himself that he had traded up, that he had found someone better, someone shinier, someone easier to control. But now, as she watched them move through the room, their smiles tight, their eyes a little too wide, their laughter a little too strained, she realized the truth. He had chosen the illusion, the facade, the carefully constructed lie that he had once wrapped around himself like armor. And now, as he watched her thrive, as he watched her laugh, as he watched her move through the world without a backward glance, she knew he felt it too, the slow, creeping fear that he had made the wrong choice, that he had thrown away something real for something hollow, that he had chosen the illusion over the truth, that he had lost her, and that he would never get her back. Brielle reclaimed her space quietly, one small, deliberate act at a time, each choice a silent declaration of freedom, each step a reminder that she was no longer defined by the man who had once tried to break her. She started with her apartment, the small, sunlit space she had once shared with Marcus, the rooms that had echoed with their laughter, their whispered promises, their carefully curated dreams. She stripped the bed, tossed the sheets they had once tangled themselves in, replaced them with soft, crisp linens in a color he would have hated. Something bold, something bright, something that felt like a declaration of independence. She took down the photos that lined her walls, the carefully posed snapshots of a life she had once believed was real, packed them into a box, slid it into the back of her closet, shut the door, and never looked at them again. She rearranged the furniture, moved the couch to the opposite side of the room, shifted the coffee table to a new angle, filled the empty spaces with plants and art and books that felt like pieces of herself, pieces she had once set aside to make room for him. She even changed her morning routine, started waking up a little earlier, sipping her coffee on the balcony as the city came to life around her, her bare feet cool against the concrete, her heart steady in her chest, her mind quiet and clear for the first time in months. She reached out to old friends, people she had let drift away in the haze of a relationship that had demanded all of her attention and none of her honesty. Women who had known her before she had twisted herself into the version of herself Marcus had once demanded. Women who had waited patiently for her to remember who she was. who she had always been, who she would always be, with or without him. She took herself to dinner, sat at the bar, ordered the wine she liked, chose the meal she wanted, let the sound of clinking glasses and quiet conversation wash over her like a warm, steady tide. She even started dating again, not because she needed someone else to complete her, but because she wanted to remember what it felt like to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen for exactly who she was. And slowly, day by day, the empty, aching spaces in her heart began to fill. The sharp, stinging ache of his betrayal began to fade, replaced by a quiet, steady certainty that she was enough, that she had always been enough, that she would always be enough, no matter who he chose. And as the days stretched into weeks, as the weeks stretched into months, she felt the first real flicker of power bloom in her chest, the slow, steady pulse of strength that felt like a heartbeat beneath her skin. She had lost him, but in doing so, she had found herself again. The opportunity to set the stage came unexpectedly. It started with an invitation, a mutual friend's launch party for a new tech startup, the kind of event where everyone dressed a little too well, laughed a little too loudly, pretended a little too hard to be impressed. Brielle hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering over the RSVP, her mind turning over the possibilities, the risks, the rewards. She could have ignored it, could have politely declined, could have chosen to avoid the scene altogether, to let Marcus have his night, to let him play his part without interference. But she had come too far, had rebuilt too much, had reclaimed too many pieces of herself to slip back into the shadows, to let him carry on believing that she had been broken, that she had disappeared, that she had faded into the background of the life he had so carelessly discarded. So, she chose her dress carefully that night. Something simple, elegant, powerful, a deep, rich emerald green that clung to her curves, that made her feel strong, unbreakable, a statement piece, a silent declaration of war. When she arrived, the room was already buzzing, the air thick with the low hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the soft rustle of expensive fabric. She slipped into the crowd, moved through the clusters of familiar faces with a calm, steady grace. Her heart steady, her pulse calm, her mind sharp and clear. She caught his eye from across the room, watched the small flicker of surprise pass across his face, the way his hand tightened around his glass, the way his smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered, his arm slipping around Amelia's waist, his head tilting toward hers in a show of possessiveness that felt more like a claim than a comfort. Brielle smiled, raised her glass, and let her eyes linger on his for just a moment longer than necessary, a silent reminder that she had survived, that she had thrived, that she had risen from the ashes of their relationship without a backward glance. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor, her dress whispering against her legs as she slipped into conversations, laughed at old jokes, clinked glasses with old friends, each small act a reminder that she had never needed him, that she had always been enough, that she had always been stronger than he had ever realized. And as she turned away, her head held high, her heart steady, her mind clear, she felt the first flicker of satisfaction bloom in her chest. She had set the stage, and now all she had to do was watch him fall. Brielle felt his eyes on her long before she saw him. The party had swelled to a comfortable hum, the room buzzing with low laughter, the clink of glasses, the soft murmur of whispered conversations slipping through the cracks in the polished facade. She stood by the bar, one hand wrapped loosely around the stem of her wine glass, the other resting lightly on the cool marble counter, her heart steady, her pulse calm, her mind sharp and clear. She felt the weight of his gaze, the slow, steady burn of a man who had once believed she would crumble without him, who had once convinced himself that she would fade into the background of his life without a backward glance. She turned slowly, her dress whispering against her legs, her head held high, her eyes locking with his from across the crowded room. Marcus, the man she had once loved, the man who had once held her heart in his hands, only to crush it without a second thought. He was standing by the door, one arm wrapped loosely around Amelia's waist, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp, his posture stiff and uncomfortable, his smile a little too tight, a little too forced, a little too brittle. Brielle took a slow sip of her wine, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile as she watched the first cracks form in his carefully constructed facade. She watched as Amelia leaned in to whisper something in his ear, her fingers curling into the fabric of his sleeve, her eyes flicking nervously around the room, her smile slipping as she caught sight of Brielle's calm, unbothered expression. She saw the way Marcus's eyes followed her, the way his grip on Amelia's waist tightened, the way his jaw clenched, the way his smile slipped, the way his entire body seemed to tense at the sight of the woman he had once discarded, the woman he had once convinced himself he could live without. And in that moment, Brielle felt the first real flicker of satisfaction bloom in her chest. The slow, steady pulse of justice that felt like a quiet exhale after months of holding her breath. He had chosen Amelia, had walked away from Brielle, had discarded her like a broken toy, had convinced himself that he had traded up, that he had found someone better, someone shinier, someone easier to control. But now, as she watched him struggle to keep his composure, as she watched the first cracks form in his polished mask, as she watched the carefully constructed image he had built for himself begin to crumble, she realized the truth. He had chosen the illusion, the facade, the carefully constructed lie that he had once wrapped around himself like armor. And now, as he watched her thrive, as he watched her laugh, as he watched her move through the world without a backward glance, she knew he felt it too. The slow, creeping fear that he had made the wrong choice, that he had thrown away something real for something hollow, that he had chosen the illusion over the truth, that he had lost her, and that he would never get her back. Brielle didn't leave in a rush. There was no dramatic exit, no shattered glass or slammed doors, no shouting match on the front steps. Just the slow, steady process of untangling her life from his, piece by piece, thread by thread, until there was nothing left to hold her in place. She started small, stopped waiting for his texts, stopped checking her phone for his late-night, "I miss you" messages, the ones he used to send when his guilt caught up to him, when the weight of his betrayal felt too heavy to carry alone. She cleared his things from her apartment, bagged up the clothes he had left behind, the spare toothbrush in her bathroom, the half-empty bottle of his favorite cologne on her dresser, the old college sweatshirt he had thrown over her shoulders on their first date when the wind had picked up and she had shivered against his side. She even tossed the framed photos that lined her hallway, the carefully posed snapshots of a life she had once believed was real, packed them into a box, slid it into the back of her closet, shut the door, and never looked at them again. She rearranged her furniture, moved the couch to the opposite side of the room, shifted the coffee table to a new angle, filled the empty spaces with plants and art and books that felt like pieces of herself, pieces she had once set aside to make room for him. She took back her weekends, stopped planning her life around his schedule, started saying yes to friends she had let drift away, started choosing her own happiness over the fragile, crumbling remains of a relationship that had never really been hers. She even started dating again, not because she needed someone else to complete her, but because she wanted to remember what it felt like to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen for exactly who she was. And slowly, day by day, the distance between them grew. He noticed. Of course he did. Men like him always do. But only when the power they have so carefully cultivated begins to slip through their fingers. Only when the control they have taken for granted starts to waver. He tried to pull her back, tried to charm her, to coax her, to sweet-talk her into slipping back into the role she had once played so willingly. But she was done pretending, done playing along, done making herself small for the sake of his ego. When the day finally came, she walked out the door with her head held high, her shoulders back, her heart steady in her chest. She didn't look back, not even when she reached the curb, her suitcase bumping against her ankle, the weight of her keys still warm in her hand. She dropped them on the doorstep without a second thought, the metal clinking against the concrete, the final, satisfying note in a song she had stopped singing a long time ago. And as she stepped into the waiting car, she felt the first breath of real freedom fill her lungs. She had walked away, and she would never, ever look back. The days that followed felt like waking up from a long, heavy dream. Brielle moved into her new apartment slowly, unpacking one box at a time, letting each small, deliberate choice feel like a declaration of freedom. She hung her own art, painted the walls colors he would have hated, bold, rich tones that made the small space feel alive, vibrant, like a heartbeat beneath her feet. She filled the shelves with books she had once set aside, too busy pretending to share his interests to remember her own, too wrapped up in his world to make space for her own voice. She stopped checking her phone for his messages, stopped looking over her shoulder for his shadow, stopped measuring her worth by the reflection she saw in his eyes. She took herself to dinner, sat at the bar, ordered the wine she liked, chose the meal she wanted, Let the sound of clinking glasses and quiet conversation wash over her like a warm, steady tide. She reconnected with old friends, women who had known her before she had twisted herself into the version of herself he had once demanded, women who had waited patiently for her to remember who she was, who she had always been, who she would always be, with or without him. She even started dating again, not because she needed someone else to complete her, but because she wanted to remember what it felt like to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen for exactly who she was. She threw herself into her work, poured her energy into projects she had once been too hesitant to claim, raised her hand in meetings, pushed for promotions, claimed her place at the table without a second thought. And slowly, the sharp, stinging ache of his betrayal faded, replaced by a quiet, steady certainty that she was enough, that she had always been enough, that his inability to see her worth had never been a reflection of her value, but a testament to his own blindness. She had lost him, but in doing so, she had found herself again. And as she stood on the balcony of her new apartment, the city lights stretching out before her like 1,000 tiny stars, she felt the first real smile she had known in months spread across her lips. She was whole. She was free. She was unbreakable. And he was nothing more than a lesson she had already learned.
Chapter 1. The Smirk. The first time I realized Doug Merritt didn't respect me, he was halfway through a joke. It was at a team lunch. One of those casual off-site things meant to boost morale, but really just gave managers like Doug a stage. I was walking back from the restroom when I heard my name, not shouted, just dropped casually mid-sentence. I paused, just outside the room, out of view, but well within earshot. "He's a nice enough guy," Doug was saying, his voice riding that thin line between friendly and dismissive. But let's be honest, Andre's dead weight. Solid with spreadsheets, sure, but not exactly leadership material. Laughter. Not the kind that shakes walls, the kind that stings because it sounds like agreement. Someone chimed in, low and laughing. "Hey, every team needs a bench warmer." I didn't walk in right away. I stood there, hand tightening around my phone, and let the words settle. They weren't surprising, not really, just clarifying. Doug always smiled at me in meetings, always started emails with "appreciate you," and ended them with too many exclamation points. But now I had the truth, not in writing, but in tone. And it wasn't new, this kind of dismissal. People had been underestimating me for years. I wasn't flashy. I didn't dominate meetings or interrupt to make my point. I listened more than I spoke, observed before I moved. That made certain people nervous, especially men like Doug, who mistook performance for power. Doug had been my manager for just under a year. I'd transferred into his team from another division, looking for growth, challenge, upward mobility. On paper, it made sense, but from day one, it felt off. Subtle things, projects reassigned at the last minute, credit quietly redirected, performance reviews that praised my attitude but questioned my initiative. I'd spent my whole career walking a tightrope, trying to be competent but not threatening, helpful but not invisible. I'd told myself it was about the long game, build trust, let my work speak. But standing in that hallway, listening to my boss call me dead weight between bites of steak, something snapped into place. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't miscommunication. Doug didn't just underestimate me. He needed to, because if I ever got taken seriously by the people above him, he'd be exposed for exactly what he was, a man holding on to power he hadn't earned. So I walked into that lunch, sat back down at the table, smiled like I hadn't heard a thing, and started building my exit plan. Not to leave, to rise. Chapter 2. The Paper Trail. The next morning, I bought a notebook. Not a digital doc, not an app, a real one. Black leather cover, thick paper, the kind of thing you'd buy for journaling. But I wasn't writing affirmations. I was building a record. I didn't tell anyone. Not my coworkers, not HR, not even Maya. The one person on the team who always made space at the table, who passed me the mic in meetings, even when Doug cut me off mid-sentence. I kept the notebook in my backpack, tucked behind my laptop sleeve. Every time Doug made a joke that landed just a little too sharp, every time he changed a project brief after the deadline, then blamed me for not reading his mind, every time he sent an email and CC'd a senior leader just to point out something I supposedly missed, I wrote it down. Date, time, context, tone. Not because I thought it would lead to some dramatic confrontation, but because I knew how stories get rewritten in rooms I wasn't invited into. Doug played the game well. He was good at charm, at optics, at painting himself as the tough but fair leader who just wanted the best for his team. And guys like him, they didn't get caught because they didn't leave fingerprints, just bruises. I wasn't planning revenge, not yet. I just wanted a record, in case things got worse. In case I ever needed to prove I wasn't crazy. Still, a small part of me hoped it might shift. That maybe Doug would surprise me. That maybe if I just performed better, sharper, faster, I could change the story. But that week, he sent back a report I'd spent 14 hours cleaning and refining. All he wrote in the margin was, "Try again, this is sloppy." No guidance, no clarification, just the sting. So I stapled that version to the inside of the notebook. Then the next version. Then the email chain that proved I followed his edits exactly. One by one, I stitched the narrative together. Quietly, carefully, because if he was going to make me invisible, I was going to make myself undeniable. Chapter 3, Unofficial Warnings. Doug didn't fire bullets. He cut with paper. By week 4, I noticed the pattern. No direct confrontation, just sudden silence in group chats. No invites to meetings I used to lead. Project decks passed on without my name. Comments that looked neutral on paper, but carried teeth in the room. I just figured you were too swamped. I assumed you'd want to take a back seat on this one. Let's loop Andre in later. I think this one's a little beyond his bandwidth. Each sentence was a matchstick, flicked casually, carelessly, into the space I used to own. He didn't need to scream I was incompetent. He was curating the illusion. A campaign built on plausible deniability and careful omissions. At first, I second-guessed everything. Maybe I was under-delivering. Maybe I wasn't proactive enough. But the truth had a way of showing up when you least expected it. It showed up in the break room, actually. Marcos Lin, senior analyst, quiet but sharp. He was 2 days away from leaving the company when he caught me by the coffee machine. "You working under Doug now?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," I said. 3 months in. He gave a dry chuckle and sipped his coffee. "Don't take it personally. He plays that same playbook every time. Picks someone smart, drains them, then rewrites the story when things go south." I blinked. "He's done this before?" 3 times I know of. He grooms scapegoats like it's a rotation. But you? He squinted at me. "You document everything, don't you?" I didn't confirm, didn't deny, just held his gaze. "Smart," Marcos said. "You'll need it, especially if he starts going for your review file." Mine got edited after I left. Subtle stuff, just enough to poison the well. I swallowed hard. I hadn't even thought about that. Retroactive edits. Narrative damage after the fact. If Doug was willing to sabotage quietly while I was present, what would he do once I was out of the building? Marcos walked away with a nod, but left behind a warning I couldn't unhear. He doesn't just try to ruin your job, he tries to rewrite your career. That night, I added 2 new sections to the notebook. One titled Retaliation Patterns, the other Reputation Prep. Because if he wanted a story, I was going to write the truth and date every page. Chapter 4, The Exit Interview. Exit interviews were usually a formality. Most people smiled, nodded, gave vague feedback, and walked out with their dignity and a signed NDA. But when Gina from HR asked if I had 10 minutes to talk, just to support the transition of a departing team member, I didn't hesitate. The team member? Devin Wu. Devin had been one of the most capable operations leads we had. Smart, fast, solution-oriented, and she always seemed tired. Not in a lazy way, in the way people look when they're constantly carrying extra weight no one acknowledges. She sat across from me in the small glass-walled conference room. It was her last day. Her badge clipped to her pocket. Laptop already turned in. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," she said as soon as Gina stepped out. "Doug's the reason I'm leaving." I blinked. "You're saying that to me?" "I've said it in every form I can. Anonymously, in reviews, in exit surveys. Doesn't matter. No one touches him." I didn't say anything. Just let the silence stretch. Devin leaned in. "He did to you what he did to me. And Marcos. And Priya before that. Isolation, slow erasure, then strategic blame. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. Devin slid a folded paper across the table. It's not much, just a printout, but you'll want to keep it. I opened it. It was a timestamped screenshot, a Slack thread from 3 months ago. Doug blaming a botched workflow on me. The thing was, I hadn't even been staffed on that workflow. He deletes and edits threads when he knows he's sloppy, Devin said. But I kept that one before he nuked it. Backed up the day I decided to leave. I looked up. Why me? She gave a tired smile. Because I think you'll actually use it. The rest of us just want it out. I didn't say thank you. Didn't promise revenge. Just folded the printout, tucked it behind my notebook pages, and walked out of the room with something new burning under my ribs. Resolve. Doug didn't just mess with employees. He erased them. And this time, one of us was keeping the receipts. Chapter 5. The Lateral Move. On paper, it looked like I was stepping down. The new role didn't come with a raise. It was technically a lateral shift. Same level, different department. The kind of move people make when they've outgrown their current challenges, according to the sanitized HR language. But let's be real, everyone saw it for what it was. A quiet exit, a soft shuffle out of Doug's orbit. Proof to some that maybe he'd been right all along. Looks like he couldn't hack it. Someone muttered in the hallway when they thought I was out of earshot. Doug didn't say much, just gave me that classic pitying smile, clapped me on the back during my farewell from his team, and said, "Hey, sometimes a reset is good for people." He meant it as a dig, but I let it hang in the air, because I wasn't resetting, I was rerouting. The truth was, the new department had something Doug's didn't. Autonomy. No micromanagement, no daily sabotage, no Doug. Instead, I got handed a small team, a stack of chaotic projects, and one clear directive from my new boss, Valerie Cross. Fix what's broken. I trust your judgment. Valerie didn't babysit. She didn't perform leadership. She did it. Which meant, if I earned her trust, I'd be left to lead without interference. It was the oxygen I'd been gasping for. Within 2 weeks, I had the team back on track. Within 2 months, we were outperforming Doug's department in both delivery time and client satisfaction. Quietly, consistently, without the drama. And all the while, I kept collecting. Emails, reports, praise from internal partners, project metrics, performance snapshots. Not to brag, to prepare, because I wasn't interested in proving Doug wrong. I was interested in making sure he didn't do it to anyone else again. And the only way to do that was to build a resume so undeniable that even Doug would have to look me in the eye one day and submit something for my approval. Chapter 6. The Quiet Build. I didn't talk much during meetings those days. Not because I didn't have ideas, but because I'd learned that the loudest person in the room isn't always the one driving the agenda. Sometimes it's the person listening, observing, drawing lines no one else sees. That's what I was doing. My new department didn't look flashy on the org chart, but it was strategic. We touched multiple business units. If something broke, our team either fixed it or found out who was responsible. It meant access, insight, reach. And I made sure I earned all of it. I stayed late, cleaned up inherited messes, rewrote outdated playbooks. I never bragged. I just delivered, and then quietly documented the results. When Valerie Cross, my new director, asked how the backlog looked after week 3, I showed her a real-time dashboard I'd built over the weekend. She blinked at it. "We've needed this since before I took this seat," she said. "How did no one think to do this before?" I didn't answer, but I could name at least one guy who never would have let anyone else shine that bright. The more I built, the more I realized how Doug had stunted me, not just professionally, but mentally. I'd internalized his voice without knowing it, second-guessed my instincts, held back to avoid looking arrogant, watered down my own presence. But with Valerie, the silence was different. It wasn't dismissive, it was space. And when she did speak, it mattered. "You should lead this next planning cycle," she said one Friday after I'd wrapped a cross-functional brief. "We need someone who can handle both systems and people." That wasn't just a compliment. That was succession language. Meanwhile, I started getting strange messages, not from Doug, from people around him. A project manager on his team reached out to grab coffee and pick my brain. A marketing liaison, someone who'd ignored me for months, suddenly wanted to collaborate on a future initiative. And then there was a forwarded calendar invite I wasn't even meant to see, a planning session Doug had scheduled, using my original restructure model. He was sniffing around now, realizing I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And maybe worse, I wasn't doing it through noise, I was doing it through numbers, through metrics that showed up in the company-wide dashboard, through recommendations sent directly to the C-suite. Doug had always been good at politics, but he'd underestimated the one thing that would outrun him in the end: results. And those don't stay quiet forever. Chapter 7. All eyes on him. The first time I realized people were watching him instead of me, it came in a side comment, one of those throwaway lines that meant more than it let on. We were in a cross-department sync, reviewing timelines for a major system overhaul. I wasn't running the meeting, but I'd submitted the framework that got us there. My plan, my metrics. Doug was supposed to present the resource impacts from his division. He stumbled, blamed staffing, blamed upstream miscommunication, and then Valerie cut in. Doug, are you saying your team hasn't implemented the project guidelines Andre submitted? They've been live for 3 weeks. Doug tried to recover. Oh, we've partially adopted them, but we're tailoring them to our unique structure. Valerie didn't blink. What part of the structure is unique, exactly? Silence. Doug muttered something about needing more time. The call moved on, but the air had changed. Afterward, I got a Slack from Daniel Price, the SVP. He looked unprepared. You didn't. Let's chat next week. That's when I knew. I wasn't the one being assessed anymore. Doug was, and I hadn't said a word. From that point forward, things shifted quickly. Doug's updates grew more frantic. He started showing up to optional meetings, volunteering for initiatives he used to ignore. The swagger started to crumble, replaced by a kind of frantic professionalism that screamed insecurity. Meanwhile, I started getting pulled into bigger rooms. Daniel asked me to contribute to a cross-regional audit on operational flow. Valerie forwarded an internal nomination form for an executive development program, one tier below VP. And in every conversation, the tone had changed. People didn't ask if I could lead anymore. They asked when I'd be ready. Doug could feel it. I saw it in the way he avoided eye contact, the way he overcompensated in meetings, like a man realizing the tide was pulling away from his feet, and the only thing beneath him was sand. He tried, once, to meet me halfway, caught me in the hallway, smiled like old times. Hey, just wanted to say, you're really finding your groove in that new role. Looks good on you. I met his gaze, appreciate that, and walked right past him, because I didn't need his approval anymore. The people who mattered had already seen the difference. And they weren't looking at me like I had something to prove. They were looking at Doug like he had something to explain. Chapter 8. The reorg. Reorgs usually smell like fear. People get twitchy. Calendars fill up with one-on-ones. Whispered hallway conversations bloom like weeds. Everyone starts watching for the signs. Who's updating their LinkedIn? Who's suddenly cordial? Who's in rooms they've never been in before? But me, I was calm. Because while everyone else was scrambling for a seat at the table, I'd been building the table. Quietly, brick by brick, metric by metric. It started with a late Friday email from Valerie. Subject line, transition plans, confidential. Inside was a brief mention of structural changes to streamline operations. Beneath that, a list of proposed leadership roles in the new org model. And next to one of them, under Executive Director, Enterprise Process and Ops, Andre Kellum, proposed. My throat tightened. I reread it 3 times, then once more, just to feel it sink in. Executive Director. 2 levels above my current role, and 1 level above Doug. It wasn't official yet. The org chart was still in flux, but the seed had been planted, and from what I could tell, Doug had no idea. He still acted like he had leverage, still floated in and out of meetings with that same easy performative confidence, but now he was late to updates, missed deadlines, threw junior analysts under the bus when questions came from above. The cracks were no longer subtle. They were visible, audible, and senior leadership, they were noticing. I wasn't in the room when the decision got finalized, but I heard about it 2 days later from Gina in HR, who stopped me in the hallway with a raised brow. "You ready for this?" she asked. I didn't ask what she meant. I just nodded. The official announcement came that Friday, a company-wide email. New structure, new titles, new reporting lines. And there it was, under the section marked Promotions and Appointments. Andre Kellum, Executive Director, Enterprise Process and Operations, reporting to Daniel Price, SVP, Strategy and Systems. Doug's name wasn't under mine. It was beneath mine. He now reported to me. And the best part? I didn't say a single word. No back-channeling, no politicking, just results. And now the same man who once called me dead weight was about to find out whose name was on his next performance review. Chapter 9, Promotion Material. I walked into the Monday leadership meeting 10 minutes early, not to make a statement, to get a feel for the room. It was bigger than the old conference space. Glass walls, high ceilings, a sleek touchscreen monitor that stretched across half the wall. These were the meetings Doug used to name drop like they were private clubs. Now I had a permanent seat. My nameplate was already waiting at the table. Andre Kellum, Executive Director. I ran my fingers across the letters once. Then I sat down. Doug came in late, not by much. 3 minutes, maybe. But enough to draw eyes, enough to feel it. He paused when he saw me. Not a stumble, just a flicker. That split second where your brain recognizes a shift before your ego catches up. Then he kept walking, took a seat 2 spots down, and adjusted his blazer like the room hadn't changed. But it had. Daniel Price opened the meeting with a warm welcome, called out the new leadership structure, and then turned to me. "Andre, want to kick us off?" That moment, that pivot, the passing of gravity in the room. Doug didn't look at me as I stood, but everyone else did. I walked them through the first 60-day roadmap, timeline, restructuring plan, pain points. I spoke clearly, confidently, no fluff, just facts, because I didn't need to perform. I belonged there now. Afterward, as the meeting broke and people scattered, Doug approached me. "Hey," he said, half smile in place. "Congrats. Big move." I nodded. "Appreciate it." He hesitated. "Listen, I'd love to chat sometime. Catch up. Talk through some of the transition stuff, maybe even clear the air." There it was, the first crack in his armor. I looked at him, really looked, and then I said, "Sure, send me time slots. My assistant will coordinate." Then I turned and walked away, because Doug wasn't the one dictating access anymore. He wasn't evaluating me. He was trying to keep up, and now he was the one with something to prove. Chapter 10, The Return. I didn't rush the site visit. There was no announcement. No dramatic entrance, just a quiet Friday walkthrough of Doug's old floor, the department I used to work in, the place where I'd been minimized, dismissed, erased, one harmless joke at a time. Now I was back, but not as a peer, not as a team lead, as their new executive. The walk from the elevator to the operations wing felt shorter than I remembered. Maybe because the fear was gone. Maybe because the weight Doug used to carry had always been performative. All puff. No spine. Marla, the project coordinator who used to avoid eye contact when Doug barked at her, perked up when she saw me. "Mr. Kellum, Andre," she corrected quickly, flustered. "Welcome back." I smiled. "It's good to be back." A few others glanced up from their monitors. The vibe wasn't tense, just uncertain. Like people waiting to see if this was just a formality or something that might actually stick. Doug wasn't on site that day. His calendar showed remote focus blocks, which I suspected meant hiding. Maybe it was strategic, or maybe he just couldn't stomach watching me take the seat he used to covet. But his legacy? That was still here. And it looked tired. Metrics were stale. Feedback scores were low. Attrition had spiked. I'd read the reports, but seeing it in person hit different. These weren't numbers. These were people left behind. I pulled Marla aside before I left. "How honest can I be?" she asked. I gave her a look. Completely. She took a breath. Doug drained the room, made us doubt ourselves. Every win felt temporary. Every mistake felt fatal. I nodded. Noted, "We're rebuilding that." She looked relieved, hopeful even. "We?" I nodded again. "We." Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about repair. Doug had hollowed out the place to prop himself up, Now it was time to build something solid and leave no room for men like him to hide. Chapter 11: The Review Cycle. The performance review landed in my inbox with a subject line so ordinary it almost made me laugh. Subject: Q3 leadership feedback, pending final input. Inside, a familiar format: columns, metrics, comments. But the name at the top of the form stopped me. Doug Merritt, Director, Business Ops. For years, that name had been my ceiling. Now it was just a line item in my pipeline. I read it once through like a stranger, then again like a historian, looking for evidence, for patterns, for the rot beneath the paint. Doug's self-evaluation was classic Doug: glossy, buzzword-heavy, carefully crafted to deflect attention from the gaps. Every shortcoming was framed as a cross-functional learning opportunity. Every delay was someone else's alignment challenge. But the numbers didn't lie. Project delivery was behind. Retention had dropped. Engagement scores tanked. Worse than that, I found something else, buried in a footnote. An initiative Doug claimed credit for that he didn't start. The very workflow update Devin Wu had piloted before she left. He'd scrubbed her name, rewritten the timeline, and presented it as his own. That was the line. Not because of the theft, but because of the erasure. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. This was the moment I'd fantasized about: the justice, the reckoning, the chance to reduce him to a rating the way he'd once done to me. But that's not what I did. I didn't slash his score out of spite. I didn't inflate it out of pity. I told the truth. Clear, detailed, professional. I cited metrics, quoted anonymous team feedback, linked audit trails and decision logs. I made the case, not just for performance concerns, but for a pattern of behavior that posed a leadership risk. I submitted the review. No flourish, no note, just facts. The fallout? That would come, but for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to fix it. Doug's era was ending, and this time it would be documented. Chapter 12: The Reckoning. It didn't happen in a town hall. There was no dramatic announcement, no flashing red flag, just a Tuesday morning calendar update, personnel review follow-up, closed session. Doug was still logged into Slack when it hit. I saw his green light flicker on, off, then on again. A heartbeat of hesitation. I didn't attend the meeting. Didn't need to. I'd already submitted everything: the timeline, the pattern, the corroboration. HR had what they needed. The SVP had already asked his one quiet question a week earlier. Is there anyone on his team still thriving under him? There wasn't. By 11:43 a.m., Doug's name disappeared from the org directory. No goodbye email. No farewell donuts in the break room. Just gone. The whispers started almost immediately. What happened? Was it a reorg thing? Did you know this was coming? I didn't answer. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I just went back to work, because revenge wasn't the point. Restoration was. 3 days later, Marla sent me a Slack message. I saw the update. Thank you, for all of us. It was the shortest message I got that week, and the one I saved. Doug's departure wasn't an ending. It was a clearing. An overdue shift that let the rest of us finally breathe without second-guessing every step. And me? I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Because when someone calls you dead weight, and you become the one holding their future in your hands, you don't scream. You document. You build. You wait. And then you let their story collapse under the weight of your receipts. Epilogue: the quietest win. 3 months later, I got an email from someone I didn't recognize. Subject: I used to work under Doug too. It was short, just a thank you. No details, no rants, just a note from someone who'd been erased, forgotten, discarded, like so many before me. But this time, someone had kept the door open behind them. I didn't reply right away. I sat with it, because that was the real win. Not the promotion, not the corner office, not even the quiet HR update that finally ended Doug's tenure. The win was in the restoration, the shift in tone across the department, the way new hires asked questions freely, the way feedback actually flowed up, not just down, the way people started showing up like they mattered. And me? I still keep the folder, all the screenshots, the notebook, the timeline, not out of spite, out of memory. Because what Doug tried to do to me, he did to others, and people like him don't stop unless someone documents the truth. I didn't burn bridges. I built a lighthouse. So the next time someone in his position tries to erase a voice like mine, or Devin's, or Marcos's, or anyone who dares to care while being competent, they'll find out too late. We're still here. And we're not waiting to be believed anymore. Chapter 1. The Comment. It happened on a Thursday night. We were hosting one of those casual little dinners he loved to throw. Rustic cheese board, mismatched wine glasses, a playlist just pretentious enough to impress. He always made a show of it, even though I did most of the prep. He'd light the candles, open the wine with flair, say things like, "It's a blend from Sonoma," as if the bottle didn't come from the corner shop's manager's special. His people were all there, the ones who had known him before. Before me, before the house, before things got quiet. Caleb, Jen, Vince, a few of their spouses, loud, comfortable people who thought familiarity excused cruelty. I smiled, poured drinks, passed trays, said little. At one point, I excused myself to the kitchen. Someone had left an open bottle sweating on the counter, and I went to clean it up. That's when I heard it. Not shouted, not whispered, just dropped casually between jokes and sips of wine. Like it was nothing at all. "She's too soft," one of them said. Probably Caleb. He'd always treated me like furniture, something that matched the decor but didn't need acknowledgement. "She'll never leave," he added with a quiet laugh. "Not built like that." There was a pause, then a chorus of low chuckles, that quiet, smug kind of group laughter that only happens when everyone in the room assumes they're right and untouchable. I didn't move. I just stood there, one hand still on the wine bottle, the other clenching the dish towel I hadn't realized I was holding. Too soft. The words echoed, not just in the air, but somewhere deeper, somewhere more dangerous. It wasn't just what he said. It was the fact that he said it so freely, so comfortably in our house, with our wine, surrounded by people who had never once asked what I thought or how I felt. That was the moment it shifted. Not loudly, not all at once, just a small internal click, like the sound of a lock turning. Later that night, after everyone left and the dishwasher hummed in the background, I brought it up. Casual, quiet, like it didn't matter. "Funny what Caleb said," I murmured, "about me being too soft." He was already half watching TV, one hand scrolling his phone. He barely looked at me. "They were just messing around. You know how they are." I waited. He didn't elaborate, didn't ask if it hurt, didn't deny it. Just let the silence settle, comfortable in his belief that I wouldn't push back. I said nothing else, just nodded, and turned out the lights. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. I replayed the words, the laughter, his silence, and I made a decision. Not all at once, not with fury, with precision, with patience, like the first step in a quiet plan. Because once someone decides you're too soft to leave, they never think to check if you're strong enough to disappear. Chapter 2. The Realization. It wasn't like the movies. There was no dramatic reveal, no lipstick on a collar, no late-night phone left unlocked, just patterns, small ones, subtle shifts, the kind of things you don't notice until you stop trying to explain them away. It started with the joint account. I logged in one morning to pay the gardener, something I'd done a dozen times before, and saw a transfer I didn't recognize. $3,200. Gone. Labeled vaguely. Vendor fee. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off. "Just settling something from work," he said. "Which vendor?" I asked. He didn't answer. Just kissed the top of my head and walked out the door like it was sweet. That was the first time I opened my own spreadsheet. Nothing dramatic. Just a file labeled groceries on my laptop. But instead of eggs and milk, I listed every charge I hadn't made. Every withdrawal he hadn't mentioned, every card I didn't have a copy of. By the end of the week, there were 6 entries. By the end of the month, there were 32. It didn't stop there. He started locking his office door when he worked late, password protecting his calendar, saying things like, "You wouldn't understand," when I asked about the business. He hadn't always been like that. When we first got married, he used to joke that I was the numbers one, the calm brain behind his big ideas. Now I was something else, something in the way, a liability to be managed, a risk. But it wasn't just the secrecy. It was the rewriting. He started retelling stories in front of his friends, changing details, minimizing my role, laughing at things I never remembered being funny. She was a mess the day we bought the house, he said at a dinner once. Cried over the down payment paperwork. Total meltdown. I hadn't cried. I'd negotiated the loan myself. He didn't even know what escrow was. That night I said nothing, just smiled and added another note to my file. It was slow, like rust creeping up under the paint, but it was real. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a performance. And I was the prop he no longer thought could speak. But I was listening now. And I had time. Chapter 3, The Quiet Inventory. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I just watched. He was so sure of himself by then. He didn't notice. He still talked over me at dinners, still left receipts in his coat pockets, still left his laptop open when he went to refill his whiskey. I never snooped. I didn't need to. I just paid attention. And quietly I took inventory. At first, it was the obvious things: bank accounts, credit cards, property titles. I listed every account number I could find, every automatic withdrawal, every login screen I'd ever glanced over his shoulder. Then I went deeper. I recorded the serial numbers on the big-ticket items. The watch he claimed was a gift from the firm. The designer furniture we splurged on together, but had somehow been billed to my card. I took photos, copied statements, backed up emails, saved voice memos of conversations where he contradicted himself without even realizing it. Every lie had a timestamp. Every shift in tone had a digital footprint, and all of it went into the file. A folder on my private drive labeled something no one would ever open: fall recipe ideas. Inside that folder was a password-protected document labeled pomegranate. I don't even like pomegranates. He never asked questions. That was the thing about men like him. They assume silence means submission. They think stillness means softness. That if you haven't left yet, you won't. Can't. Don't know how. But I wasn't frozen. I was focused. The hardest part wasn't gathering the information. It was pretending I hadn't. Pretending to forget the vendor charges. Pretending I still believed him when he said, "Relax, babe, it's handled." Pretending I didn't know that the vacation deal he booked for two was actually charged to our joint account and later refunded quietly to a card in his name only. He had a plan. I knew that now, but so did I. And mine didn't require confrontation, or fireworks, or shouting in the middle of the night. Mine only required time and a clean exit. Chapter 4, The Ghost Ledger. The moment I realized I didn't need to win an argument, just the paperwork, everything changed. I stopped trying to be heard and started making copies. Every important file we had: birth certificates, insurance policies, tax records, home deeds, loan agreements, I scanned and saved to an encrypted drive. I didn't rush. I didn't take risks. I copied them during laundry cycles, while he was on runs, while he watched his YouTube stock gurus with headphones on. I created a full shadow version of our life, a second set of everything, one he didn't know existed. I opened a private checking account at a credit union across town, used my maiden name, rerouted my paycheck there, just a few hundred at a time, never enough to trigger suspicion. I had the passwords to everything he assumed I never noticed. Not because he gave them to me, but because he was lazy, predictable. He reused birthdays, pet names. Once, he used the name of a restaurant he took me to while planning a trip I wasn't invited on. I changed nothing, altered nothing, just mirrored. Emails, call logs, travel itineraries, even his search history. I set up a sync that forwarded his cloud backup to my own inbox. It was disturbingly easy. One night, he messaged someone I didn't recognize. Still working on it. She's not going anywhere. Then, a laughing emoji. I didn't know if he meant another woman, a plan, something worse. Didn't matter. He'd made one assumption too many, and I no longer cared about the details. I started calling it the Ghost Ledger, my private log of everything that could be used later. To freeze, to file, to walk. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was insurance. Because when someone bets everything on your silence, your proof becomes your power. Chapter 5. His plan. I don't know what I expected when I opened the folder on his desktop. It was late. He was asleep on the couch, snoring through a rerun, with his phone face down and half a glass of whiskey still sweating on the table. He'd left his laptop open, careless, like always. Password saved. No lock screen. I didn't go looking. Not exactly. I just clicked. A folder labeled Q4 Prep. He used business speak for everything, gave his secrets professional names, as if it made them less personal. Inside were scanned documents, PDFs. Some were financial, quarterly reports for the business I helped him launch, despite what he told his friends. Others were darker. A folder labeled Preliminary Division. Another labeled Protective Filing. One that stopped me cold, Asset Retention Strategy, Personal. I opened it. There were spreadsheets, all formatted to look like business summaries, but they weren't. They were ours. Our home, our joint accounts, my car, the brokerage account in both our names, the one my uncle helped us set up right after we got married. Every item had a corresponding note in red. Title in my name only, double check. Refinance before filing to avoid 50-50 risk. Remove her from account, cite financial instability if needed. Document erratic behavior. Talk to Rob about examples. Rob, his friend from college, the one who called me overly emotional when I once cried over a miscarriage they never told anyone about. I stared at the screen, trying to breathe. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't miscommunication. This was a plan. He wasn't waiting for me to walk. He was waiting for the perfect moment to cut me loose and make it look like my fault. That's when I knew. He never thought I'd leave because he believed I had nothing to leave with. He thought the accounts were his, that the narrative was his, that I was soft, passive, forgettable. He didn't know I already had a mirror of every file on his drive. Didn't know I had his conversations with Rob auto-forwarding to a ghost inbox. Didn't know I had already moved the titles he assumed I wouldn't notice into a trust with my sister as backup trustee. He wasn't the only one playing a long game. He just thought he was playing alone. Chapter 6, Her Lockout. It began with the passwords. I waited until a weekend he went to visit his brother, some guy's fishing trip he'd mentioned in passing, but never invited me to. That was always the pattern. I existed behind the curtain, supportive and unseen, while he played the doting, self-made husband in public. That weekend, I opened every single account tied to our life. Joint bank accounts, utility bills, mortgage logins, cloud backups. I didn't delete anything. I didn't transfer massive sums. I just changed the secondary contacts, removed his name as an authorized user, updated the email addresses, all to ones he didn't know I had. Every login now pointed to me. Next, I called the credit card companies. Calm, polite. I told them I suspected a compromise and asked to reissue my cards with new numbers. I wasn't lying. My trust had been compromised. My security had been breached. They never asked for proof, just verified my identity and put the wheels in motion. By Tuesday, my name was on everything that mattered. His, nowhere. He didn't notice. Not yet. He was still operating under the illusion that nothing could happen without his permission. He still asked questions like, "Did you pay the landscaper?" And I'd smile and say, "Of course." He still forwarded invoices to the joint account inbox. He didn't realize I'd redirected it to a new domain that only I controlled. But this wasn't just about finances. It was about access, authority, autonomy. So I changed the locks on the filing cabinet he never opened, replaced the key fob for the safe in the garage with one only I could program, made a quiet visit to the DMV, and transferred my vehicle title fully into my name, something he thought had been done years ago but never followed up on. Then came the big one. I contacted the attorney who handled the initial paperwork for our prenup, not to challenge it, not yet, but to request a certified copy. I told her I was doing some financial house cleaning and wanted to cross-reference a few things for estate planning. She didn't press, she just emailed it to me. And when I read through the document again, slowly this time, not as a newlywed in love, I saw the loopholes he'd never bothered to fix. The protections he assumed were ironclad weren't, especially not when paired with the receipts I'd quietly been collecting. I documented every step, every form, every contact. My Google Drive was now a silent fortress. My phone had a two-factor vault app even I couldn't access without a fingerprint. I wasn't running away. I was building an airtight strategy, a life raft he wouldn't even know I'd launched until the ship was underwater. And maybe that was what made me different from him. He manipulated to win. I maneuvered to leave. No drama, no damage, just silence, and the slow, surgical removal of his access to me. Chapter 7. The Vanish. The morning I left, I woke up at 4:11 a.m. I didn't need an alarm. I hadn't slept much anyway. Not out of nerves, but clarity. There's something oddly peaceful about finality when you're the one choosing it. The room was still dark, the edges of the curtains just starting to pale with dawn. He slept soundly beside me, arm draped over the pillow like he had any idea what today was. I watched him for a moment, not out of love. That had evaporated long before this. Out of curiosity, how many times had he rolled over in that bed, confident I would still be there in the morning? How many times had he counted on my stillness as proof of loyalty, of submission? He didn't know he was already alone. I moved carefully. My go-bag was already zipped, hidden beneath the guest bed, inside a box marked donations. I packed it slowly over several weeks, a shirt at a time, my favorite mug wrapped in a towel, the folder of original documents tucked into a laptop sleeve I pretended not to use. I showered, dressed, put on mascara. The ritual was for me, not him. Downstairs, I brewed the coffee like I always did. His favorite roast. Timer set the night before. I laid out his keys, charged his headphones, checked the weather, and left his umbrella by the door. Routine. Comforting, predictable. That was the point. This wasn't an escape in the dead of night. It was a departure so quiet it bordered on surgical. The house was immaculate. Trash out, dishwasher running, fridge stocked, bed made. I left nothing out of place, nothing that would tip him off. Because when someone believes you'll never leave, the cruelest truth isn't that you do. It's that you planned it for months, right under their nose, and still had time to top off the ice trays before you vanished. I didn't leave a note, not out of spite, out of respect for my silence. My car, now registered under a trust, waited 2 blocks down, parked behind an abandoned yoga studio. I took side streets to the highway, never looked back. I passed the city line just as the sun broke. The sky was streaked in orange and slate, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. Not euphoric, not vengeful, just done. No more walking on eggshells, no more trying to be understood, no more justifying boundaries that should have never been crossed. By the time he woke up, I was already gone. Phone number deactivated, email address scrubbed, my name no longer attached to anything that could be used against me. His banking notifications would start around 9 a.m. The locked accounts, the bounced access attempts, the missing auto transfers. That's when the panic would hit. Maybe he'd think I ran out of emotion, but the truth? I had simply run out of permission. And the quiet that followed me as I drove into my next chapter wasn't emptiness, it was control. Chapter 8. The Freeze. It started with something small. He was on his way to a breakfast meeting, the kind he liked to show up early for, already caffeinated and casually dominant. He pulled into the cafe lot, slipped on his sunglasses, and checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. Everything was in place. Pressed shirt, silver cufflinks, a man who had everything under control. He ordered his usual, triple espresso, dry croissant, extra butter, and handed over his black card like a magician revealing the final act. The barista swiped, paused, tried again. "I'm sorry," she said, offering a polite but practiced smile. "It's not going through." He blinked. "That's impossible. It's showing as declined." She tilted the screen toward him, apologetic. He waved it off with a half laugh. "I'll use another one." He pulled out the second card, his quiet account, the one she'd never asked about, and slid it across the counter. This one didn't even blink, just beeped. "Error. Sir, this one too." He stared at her. For a moment, his brain froze too. Then he muttered something about a banking issue and left the coffee behind, the croissant still warm on the counter. Back in the car, he was already dialing. The banking app refused his fingerprint, then his password. He tried resetting it. Denied. Unrecognized device. The same phone he'd used for years. He tried the joint account login next. The one they used for the house, the insurance, the bills. Access revoked. He pulled into the driveway faster than usual. The garage door didn't open on the first try. He hit the remote again. Nothing. By the third try, it finally rumbled open. Slow, deliberate, like even the house wasn't sure it wanted to let him in. Inside, the silence was wrong. Too still, too clean. He walked through the living room and called her name. Nothing. The bedroom was immaculate. Her closet, half empty, not ransacked, just sorted. Selectively, surgically emptied. The drawers were closed, the bed was made, but her scent wasn't there. He called her phone. This number is no longer in service. He called again, straight to voicemail, then again, and again. By the fifth try, he stopped, stared down at the screen in disbelief. What the hell is going on? He opened his laptop, tried the family Dropbox. Password had changed. He clicked into the brokerage account, the one that had always just been there. He never thought to check the titles, never thought she could do anything without his say-so. Locked. He checked the mortgage portal. A red notification bar flashed across the screen. Ownership verification under review. Then he checked her location. The shared tracker she didn't know he'd installed last year. Offline. Every attempt to reach her, to find her, to understand what had just happened, failed. He sat down slowly in the desk chair and exhaled hard, confused, angry. And then, something he hadn't felt in years, panic. Chapter 9, The Confrontation. It took him 6 days. 6 days of scrambling, calling old contacts, logging into broken portals, trying passwords that used to work, but now only bought him locked screens and dead ends. 6 days of watching his empire, his illusion of control, unravel, one error message at a time. He finally figured out where I was staying, through Cass's brother, who was never good at keeping his mouth shut. He probably assumed I'd want to see him, that I'd melt at the effort. He still thought effort was currency with me. Cass and I were drinking tea in her kitchen when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, like someone announcing authority rather than requesting entry. Cass looked at me with that quiet sisterly alarm only a lifelong friend can give. "You want me to lie for you?" "No," I said, standing. "I'm not hiding. Let him see what he lost." When I opened the door, he was already in performance mode. Hair styled, button down crisp, not even a fleck of road dust on his shoes. Like this was a meeting, a formality. Like we might just talk it through and I'd come home to clean sheets and a new password he'd promised not to change this time. "Where the hell have you been?" he asked. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of control that crackled at the edges. "Living," I said calmly. His jaw twitched. "You think this is funny? You froze everything. My accounts, my brokerage. I couldn't even refill a prescription." "I left you the coffee machine," I said. Felt generous. That got under his skin. I watched it land, the subtle twitch in his eyebrow. The way he folded his arms tighter across his chest, like he was trying to hold on to what little remained of his script. "You left without a word," he said. "You embarrassed me." I tilted my head. "You're worried about being embarrassed?" He took a step forward, tone dipping into something patronizing. "Look, I know you're upset. I know it felt like you had no choice, but let's be honest, this wasn't a fair play. You caught me off guard. You weaponized things that were supposed to be shared." My voice didn't rise. I didn't blink. "I didn't weaponize anything," I said. "I just took back what was already mine. That's not how this works. You don't just walk out, freeze assets, lock me out of my own house." "Our house," I corrected, "which, by the way, you tried to quietly refinance behind my back. Shall we talk about that?" He opened his mouth, closed it, recalibrated. "You were emotional," he said, trying again. "You overreacted. We've had issues before." "No," I said, stepping through the doorframe and onto the porch, eye level now. "You had plans. I had evidence. Don't mistake your own arrogance for my absence." He stared at me like I was speaking a language he hadn't realized I knew. "Everything I did to protect myself," I said. You were lining things up to leave me broken and looking crazy. You just didn't move fast enough." His voice dropped, like he thought lowering it would make it more honest. "We can still fix this." I let that hang for a moment. Then I smiled. Small, cold, honest. "You don't fix something by burning it down and handing the ashes back." He tried again. A new angle now. You don't get to make yourself the victim, just because you played quiet for a few months. I'm not the victim, I said. You just thought I was too soft to be the one who walks. His silence was louder than anything he could have said, and for the first time, he saw it. Really saw it. I wasn't coming back. There wouldn't be a late-night phone call, no tearful reckoning. No chance to revise the narrative with him as the misunderstood hero. Just me, clear-eyed, grounded, gone. I reached for the door. What happens now? He asked, his voice suddenly hollow. I met his eyes. You rebuild, without me, with nothing that was mine. Then I stepped inside and shut the door, not to block him out, but to close the chapter with finality. Not every storm ends in thunder. Some just end with a lock clicking shut. Chapter 10, The Fallout. It started quietly. A canceled dinner invite, a delayed response in the group chat, a project partner who had to reschedule twice in the same week. To someone like him, the silence wasn't just inconvenient, it was offensive. He'd always moved through the world with a sense of entitlement, cloaked in charisma. He could be cruel, but only in private. In public, he was polished, controlled. The kind of man people believed because he said things with confidence and wore a watch that cost more than most people's rent. But now, the air around him had changed. People weren't laughing as hard at his stories, weren't asking about me, weren't offering that same automatic praise when he described himself as the one who keeps things running at home. Because word was getting out. Not all at once, not in a scandal, but in quiet shifts. Conversations whispered between mutual friends. Careful questions asked at happy hours. She left? Just like that? Did she really take everything? I always thought she was so quiet, but smart, like she noticed everything. He tried to control the story, of course. Told people I'd been unstable. Said I overreacted. That I must have found someone else. Because who else disappears in the middle of the night? But his story had holes, and people were starting to see them. Because for years, he'd talked down to me in front of them. Laughed at my sentimental budgeting. Brushed off my questions about our savings. Made digs, always just short of cruelty, when I asked about boundaries. And now, I was gone, on my terms, and somehow, he was the one left spinning. His sister tried to call me, left a voicemail filled with fake concern and a half-hearted offer to talk if I ever wanted clarity. I didn't respond, because I remembered her laughing that night in our kitchen when someone called me too soft and she didn't say a word. Even his closest circle began to shift. Caleb, the loudest of the crew, stopped returning calls. Vince started distancing himself from the business. And Jen sent me flowers. No note, just a card that read, "Took me too long to get it. I do now." And he sat in a house that felt bigger than it used to, quieter. The rooms echoed differently when no one was orbiting him. No one to reflect his version of events back at him with a nod and a grin. He used to brag that everyone respected him. But the truth? What they respected was me. They just didn't realize it until I was no longer standing beside him to soften the impact. Chapter 11, The Legal Flip. Derek liked to say lawyers were a last resort. He used to smirk when friends brought up prenups or postnups, called them trust issues in legal form, said things like, if you need a contract to stay together, you're already screwed. He liked to pretend his confidence was morality. It wasn't, it was control. And that's why I didn't tell him when I retained my attorney. Her name was Camille Reyes. Quiet, exacting, unshakable. She didn't ask why I waited. She asked for the files, the timeline, the asset list. When I showed her the ghost ledger, all those carefully documented transfers, the red-flagged purchases, the fake vendor reimbursements, she raised one eyebrow and nodded slowly. He tried to build the trap first, she said. You just finished the blueprint before he got the floorboards down. I signed the engagement letter that day. And Camille, she didn't file one motion. She filed 5. Derek was served by courier at a breakfast meeting, no less, in front of a junior partner and a potential investor. Clean envelope, legal header, neutral tone. Inside, petition for divorce, emergency order to freeze marital assets, a motion to compel disclosure of hidden accounts, preliminary spousal support, and an intent to pursue financial misconduct. He called me that night. I didn't answer. He called again, then texted, a string of messages that shifted wildly in tone. What is this? We can talk. You're not thinking clearly. Do you really want this to get ugly? I never meant for you to see those files. Camille told me not to respond. I didn't. Instead, I forwarded the texts to her, and she added them to the file, labeled Pattern of Intimidation plus Emotional Baiting Post-Filing. By the end of the week, his attorney, a well-coiffed man named Grant, who clearly thought he'd be handling someone fragile, called Camille to open a conversation about reconciliation options. She told him, "We're not interested in conversation, we're interested in resolution, documented, enforceable, and final." Derek thought I wouldn't have the stomach for a legal fight. But I didn't need to fight. I had Camille, and the truth, and a paper trail longer than his apologies. Chapter 12, The Reputation Break. For a man like Derek, the loss of money was irritating. The loss of control was infuriating. But the loss of reputation, that was unbearable. He'd built his entire identity around being composed, calculated, respected. He spoke on panels, mentored up-and-comers, had a LinkedIn feed full of curated wisdom and corporate dad jokes. He was the guy people asked for networking favors over drinks, the one they thanked for always knowing what to say. But people like that don't survive long when the truth stops cooperating. It started with whispers, a missed payment here, a rumor there. Someone in his firm leaked the story about the breakfast meeting, the one where he was served in front of a client. It made its way around the office faster than Derek could spin it. Someone even screenshotted the moment from security footage and passed it around in group chats. They added a caption, "Guess she had receipts." He started showing up less, blamed a personal matter, and took meetings from home. But even that didn't help. Clients asked questions. One requested a new point of contact. Another dropped out of a deal altogether, citing instability in leadership optics. Then came the post. Not from me. I didn't say a word, but someone, maybe Jen, maybe someone watching from afar, posted a cryptic line to social. When you strip away someone's image, all that's left is how they treated you. The comments didn't mention his name. They didn't have to. People knew. He tried to tell his version, to select a few sympathetic ears and spin it like I'd gone rogue, that I'd overreacted and gotten aggressive with legal action, that I changed after the move, or after the miscarriage, or after he had to take control of our finances to keep us stable. But his problem was, I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. My silence, paired with the sudden precision of the legal strategy, said more than I ever could. You don't call someone too soft for years, and then look surprised when they turn to steel. Derek once told a colleague, perception is the real currency, and he was right. It just never occurred to him that I owned more of it than he did. Chapter 13. The New Normal. There was no grand reinvention, no tropical rebirth, no sudden career pivot, no viral blog post about finding myself. Just calm. My mornings got slower. I stopped flinching when the phone rang. I started drinking my coffee hot instead of forgetting it on the counter. I moved into a space that made sense for me. Not large, not flashy, but mine. A place where no one sighed if I rearranged the furniture, or mocked the throw pillows, or asked why I needed 3 different kinds of tea. I got used to silence, the kind that wasn't suspicious, the kind that didn't follow a slammed door, the kind that meant I was finally alone, in a good way. The divorce moved faster than anyone expected. Camille made sure of that. Derek's team folded early, once they realized how much documentation I had. Not just the finances, but the emails, the texts, the subtle paper trail of manipulation, masked as partnership. The settlement was generous, not because Derek wanted to be generous, but because the alternative was worse, and he knew it. I didn't spend the money quickly, didn't rush to travel or flaunt a new lifestyle. I hired a financial advisor. I rewrote my will. I donated to a domestic legal clinic under Camille's name. And then, I exhaled. Sometimes, people ask if I miss him, if I miss what we had. But the truth is, I don't think we ever had the same thing. I had a life I was building with him. He had a life he was building around me. Now, I'm building a life that doesn't require translation, or proof, or permission. I still go quiet sometimes, it's who I am. But now, that quiet doesn't come from fear, it comes from power. Chapter 14. The Full Withdrawal. It was a Tuesday when I closed the last account. There was no reason it had to happen that day. No court deadline, no attorney prompt, just something quiet in me that decided. Now, today, I'd brewed tea, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened the banking app one last time. The account wasn't even significant in terms of balance. A shared savings account we used for fun goals. The kind of thing couples open when they still believe in shared futures and weekend planning sessions. It was labeled the Launch Fund. We'd come up with that together. It was supposed to be for vacations, or a future home upgrade, or a business idea we'd toss around in bed and forget by breakfast. I stared at the name of the account for a while. Funny how words that once felt bright could curdle over time. It no longer felt like a launch pad. It felt like an echo. The balance was still intact, untouched since the day I left. Not because Derek respected boundaries, but because I'd locked him out before he even knew it existed. He'd probably forgotten about it altogether. I clicked Withdraw All Funds, typed in the destination routing number, hit Confirm, watched the screen update. Then, without hesitation, I selected Close Account. It took 3 seconds. That was all. 3 seconds to end what used to be a future plan. 3 seconds to end a version of myself I had spent years trying to convince him, and everyone else was real. Afterward, I didn't cry. I didn't pour a glass of wine or play triumphant music. I just sat back, let the silence settle, watched the late morning sun filter across the hardwood floor of a space that belonged fully to me. The truth was, I'd already moved on, emotionally, legally, spiritually. This was just cleanup, paperwork, ritual, but it mattered. Because it wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about closure. Not the dramatic, scream-in-the-rain kind. The adult kind. The steady, steady breath that comes when you realize there's not a single thread left for him to pull. Nothing left for him to reverse engineer or manipulate or reinterpret. There were no joint subscriptions, no shared passwords, no emergency contacts. No frozen assumptions about who I was or who I'd stay. And Derek? He had nothing left to say. He still tried sometimes. Little things. A cryptic email. A forwarded article. A short text on what would have been our anniversary. Thought of you today. Hope you're doing okay. I didn't answer. Not out of anger, but because I didn't owe him a version of myself that no longer existed. He had loved a version of me that bent and absorbed. The version that flinched instead of spoke. The version who thought that forgiveness meant staying. She's gone. And what remained? Didn't need the last word. She just needed the last withdrawal. Epilogue. Soft no more. They called me soft. They said it like a warning. A flaw. A forecast of failure. Too soft to leave. Too soft to see it coming. Too soft to survive without him. I heard it everywhere. Sometimes whispered by relatives behind half-closed doors. Sometimes joked about at dinners. Sometimes said by Derek himself in a tone too polished to be called cruel. You take things too personally. You overthink everything. You're just sensitive. And for a long time, I believed them. I thought softness meant fragility. That my ability to absorb hurt without lashing out made me weak. That my silence in arguments meant surrender, not strategy. But they were wrong. I wasn't soft. I was patient. I was calculating. I was quiet because I was watching, listening, learning. And when I left, I didn't storm out. I didn't throw his things on the lawn. I didn't ruin him with a tantrum. I walked out without a word because I didn't need one to finish the sentence. What they never understood is that it takes strength to leave without trying to be understood, to walk away without needing applause, to rebuild without making a spectacle of the rubble. Now, when people ask what happened, I tell them this. He mistook my grace for permission, my kindness for consent, my silence for surrender. But he won't make that mistake again, because the woman he underestimated is gone, and the one who replaced her, she doesn't correct people when they call her cold. She just smiles and keeps walking. They made their choice, laughed like you'd never rise, but you didn't need their spotlight. You built your own. And now, they're watching from the sidelines while you take center stage. I was the backup plan until I took the lead. Thanks for watching Savage Endings. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share if you've ever proved someone wrong without saying a word.